Bismillahir-Rahmanir-Rahim. We start on the Imaarah, which is the book of rule. And the first chapter deals with how everyone follows the Quraysh. From Abu Hurairah, that the Prophet ﷺ said, الناس تبع لقريش في هذا الشأن مسلمهم لمسلمهم وكافرهم لكافرهم. The people follow the Quraysh in this matter. The Muslims follow the Muslims of the Quraysh, and the Kuffar follow the Kuffar of the Quraysh. In another wording, the Prophet said, الناس تبع لقريش في الخير والشر. The rest of mankind follows Quraysh in doing goodness or evil. A second narration in the chapter from Jabir ibn Samurah, the Prophet ﷺ said, لا يزال الإسلام عزيزا إلا 12 خليفة. Islam will remain strong up to 12 Khalifas. Then he said something which he did not understand. He asked Ubay what the Prophet said, and Ubay answered, كلهم من قريش. All of them will be from Quraysh. So it means that Islam will remain strong or honored up till 12 Khalifas, all of them from Quraysh. So as for the hadith which speaks about the rest of the mankind following Quraysh, well, it's because in the goodness of following Islam, the first people to accept or embrace Islam were from the Quraysh. But also the first people to reject Islam and indulge in evil and shirk and so on were from the Quraysh. Now the rest of the people will either embrace Islam or will reject Islam. You cannot have a third option. But whichever way you go, you will be in following the Quraysh, whether it be in embracing Islam or rejecting Islam. There is another narration in the chapter, we'll quote it right now. لا يزال هذا الأمر في قريش ما بقي من الناس اثنان. That this matter, meaning the rule, is to remain in the Quraysh as long as on earth there are only 2 people left. So that is to say, the ruler must be from the Quraysh. And this is what the companions agreed to when they appointed Abu Bakr to be the ruler, because the Prophet says that the ruler must be from the Quraysh. They have the priority. It is true that the ruler may be from other than Quraysh, and the Prophet ﷺ even acknowledged this when he said that you must listen and obey. Even if an Abyssinian slave was to become your ruler, you must listen and obey. But here the Prophet is not saying that it is right and proper for an Abyssinian ruler to become your slave. So he's just saying that this could happen. He's not saying that this ought to happen. To note the difference between could and ought. In the same way he said that you will follow those before you, handspan by handspan, such that if they enter into a lizard's den, one of you will also do so. This is what is going to happen. The Prophet is not saying this is what ought to happen. So what ought to happen, according to the Prophet, is that the ruler must be from the Quraysh. And Nawawi says that there is an ijma' on this matter. With regards to the 12 Khalifas spoken of, then one may ask, does this not clash with the other hadith where the Prophet said, Al-Khilafatu ba'di 30 sana, and another wording, Khilafatun Nubuwah ba'di 30 sana, that the Khilafah upon the way of the prophethood after me would be 30 years, and this can even be counted, 2 from Abu Bakr, 10 from Umar, that's 12, 12 years from Uthman, so that's 24, and 6 years from Ali, and we'll include in this 6 months of Al-Hasan, so that comes up to 30. However, these are just 4 khulafa, or 5 if we include Hassan. These are not 12. And so the answer is the Prophet said about the 30 years, the hadith of the 30 years, that this will be the khilafah of Nubuwah, the khilafah upon the way of the prophethood. But as for this hadith, which speaks about the 12 khalifas, then this is just 12 rulers, not necessarily all of them upon the khilafah of the prophethood, because after Al-Hasan, he gave the seat of khilafah to Muawiyah, and that was not the khilafah of Nubuwah, that was kingship. So kingship meaning that you have a ruler, then after that his son takes the seat, then after that his son takes the seat, and so on. So that is, they inherit the rule. So kingship in other words. In any case, up to these 12 khulafa, al-Islam will remain strong. After that it will get weaker. Okay, so who are these 12 khulafa? We can name them. The first 4 are the khulafa ar-Rashidun, so that's easy enough. Al-Hasan comes under Ali, so he's not given a separate mention. And after that, Muawiyah. After that,
Yazid ibn Muawiyah, after that Abdul Malik, then after that Hisham ibn Abdul Malik, after that Al-Walid ibn Yazid, then Yazid ibn al-Walid, then Ibrahim ibn al-Walid, and then lastly, 12thly, Marwan ibn Muhammad. This is the rule of the Banu Umayyah. After that came the rule of the Banu al-Abbas.
The next chapter is about appointing somebody as the Khalifa after you. Abdullah ibn Umar narrates, he says, I was present when my father, Umar ibn al-Khattab, was wounded. People praised him and said, May Allah reward you in good. Umar said, I am hopeful of the mercy of Allah, but also afraid of His wrath. The people told him, Istakhlif, appoint somebody as a Khalifa after you. And Umar said, should I carry your burden in my life as well as after my death? I wish I can acquit myself before Allah Jalla wa Ala in a way that there is nothing to my credit nor to my discredit. If I leave a successor, I would be following the one who is better than me, referring to Abu Bakr. But if I do not leave a successor, I would be following the one who is better than me. There he was referring to the Prophet. Abdullah ibn Umar says, when he mentioned the Prophet, I understood that he would not appoint anyone as a Khalifa after him. We take from the narration that when the Muslim dies, he should hope for the mercy of Allah Jalla wa Ala and His reward, but also fear the punishment of Allah. You need to have both. Hope and fear must be of equal amount. When you are in good health, your fear must be more than your hope. When you are ill or in bad health, your hope must be more than your fear. And when you are on your deathbed, your hope and fear must be equal. This seems to be the most balanced opinion amongst the opinions of the scholars when they discuss the matter. Which should you have more, hope or fear? We also learn that he did not appoint anyone as the Khalifa. We learn that Abu Bakr explicitly did leave a Khalifa behind, namely Umar ibn al-Khattab. And we learn also that the Prophet did not explicitly leave any Khalifa behind, because Umar said, وَإِنْ أَتْرُكْكُمْ, if I leave you, فَقَدْ تَرَكَكُمْ مَنْ هُوَ خَيْرٌ مِنِّي, then the one who is better than me also left you, meaning left you without explicitly announcing a Khalifa. And he's referring to the Prophet. However, we say that we have abundant evidence which strongly indicates to us that the Prophet would have wanted Abu Bakr to be the Khalifa. It is the only decision which would make sense if we study the evidence. However, we say that the Khalifa has the choice either to leave the people to decide who the Khalifa should be, or to actually appoint the Khalifa himself. If he's going to leave the people to decide, it should not just be any old person who decides, rather he needs to leave a committee of knowledgeable scholars who are people of sound opinion and decision who will decide who the Khalifa will be. Just as Umar ibn al-Khattab left a council of 6 men who decided that Uthman radiallahu anh should be the next to take the seat. The next chapter is about not seeking the leadership. From Abdurrahman ibn Samurah, the Prophet said to him, Ya Abdurrahman, لا تسأل الإمارة فإنك إن أعطيتها عن مسألة أكلت إليها وإن أعطيتها عن غير مسألة أعنت عليها. O Abdurrahman, do not ask for positions of power and authority, the Imaarah, because if you are given it out of asking for it, then you will be left to your own devices. But if you are given it without having asked for it, then you will be aided in this work. Also from Abu Musa in the same chapter, he says that somebody asked the Prophet to appoint them as rulers over some land. And the Prophet replied, Inna wallahi la nuwalli ala hadha al-amali ahadan sa'alahu wala ahadan harasa alayh. We, by Allah, do not appoint to this position anyone who asks for it, nor anyone who is eager for it. So the question we ask ourselves is, why do we not appoint such a person to positions of power and authority, the one who asks for it or is eager for it? And the reason is because normally such people just want authority so they can have it their way. They are not doing it to make the word of Allah Jalla wa Ala the uppermost. The true person who really is worthy of this position is the one who understands the gravity of this position and this work and role. He is the one who will not ask for this position of authority and power because he understands how truly serious this role is. It's just like the Al-Imam al-Mahdi near the end of the time, when he will come as a ruler of the Muslims. He will not want to take the role of leadership but he will be given it. The people will put him in this position because they will see him to be the most fit. So anyone who comes claiming to be the Mahdi, and there have been crazy people like that, then you know he cannot be the Mahdi, because the Mahdi will not claim to be the Mahdi. He will not desire the position of leadership. And now you can compare this hadith to the democracy that is running rampant nowadays. Everyone is canvassing for votes from the people so that they can become the minister or the prime minister or whatever other positions they may be, and they're just doing it to line their pockets with some nice easy money, and so that they can have it their way. They have no fear of Allah Jalla wa Ala whatsoever. And most of these rulers are simply obeying their paymasters, who are the bankers and the multinational corporations. They are not working for the common man on the street. They simply follow the policies and the opinion of those people who fund them and put them in power, giving the rest of the people the illusion that they have some political power. Note that this hadith, or these two hadith that we have mentioned, they're talking about political power. They're not talking about being the imam of a masjid. As we find in the Sunan, Uthman ibn Abil As asked the Prophet to make him into the imam of his people so that he will lead the prayer, and the Prophet allowed him to do that, and he said, "You are the imam, you must follow the weakest of your people, and you must not take a mu'adhin who charges for his adhan." We can, however, give an exception when it comes to asking for political power, as Yusuf alayhi salam did, to make him in charge of the treasury or the wealth of the land, which is when you know that no one else is fitting for the job and you're the only one who's fitting and has the proper qualifications, as Yusuf alayhi salam did. So this would be an exception to the general rule.
Now, another interpretation for the case of Yusuf alayhi salam is to say, no, in all cases you're not allowed to seek political power, whether it is as a prime minister or a president or even a minister underneath the prime minister, or perhaps, let's say, a governor of a particular area. Then as for Yusuf alayhi salam, they will say this was khas for a prophet, because prophets are protected from being deceitful and treacherous, whereas the average man is not. So this second interpretation is also a credible one, and Allah knows best. And these narrations tie in well with what happens with these democratic elections in many countries. Do you not see people asking others to vote for them? They are seeking power, precisely what is going on in this narration, to which the Prophet says that we do not give power to such people. But then comes the question, can a Muslim in a Kafir country join the parliament or the political system? We say if one approves of their parliament or political system, then this is kufr akbar. Because approving of kufr is kufr. It is no different to celebrating Christmas. If one approves of Christmas and their beliefs, then of course this is major kufr. And people must be informed of this, in case they fall into celebrating Christmas out of ignorance. However, it is permissible for a Muslim to join these political establishments, even if they are based on kufr, if he can reduce the evil and stand up for the rights of the Muslims. Because if no Muslim join this political system, and it gets filled with those who are inimical to the Islamic system and to the Muslims, then such people are going to run riot in the land and deprive the Muslimin of their rights, thus making life much more difficult, as we are experiencing in quite a few countries today. But we need to give this condition that he joins the political system in order to make life better for the Muslimin, so that they may have their rights and be able to worship Allah Jalla wa Ala outwardly and openly without any fear of reprisals. Now this is not the same as approving of a kufr system, because the reason you're taking part in this political system is not because you approve of it, but rather it is out of necessity, because the other option is no good at all. And it's a similar case for actually voting. You vote for the least evil person, trying to minimize the evil and corruption and maximize the goodness. Because not all kuffar are the same. Some are more inimical to Islam than others. And the Prophet ﷺ says, وَإِنَّ اللَّهَ لَيُؤَيِّدُ هَذَا الدِّينَ بِالرَّجُلِ الْفَاجِرِ. And Allah can aid this deen even with an evil man. So again, voting is not the same as approving, because the intention must be looked at. If you're only doing it to reduce the evil and to keep away corrupted people from coming into power, then this is a noble intention. And it's not like you have too much options in a kafir country.
The next chapter about the undesirability of gaining a position of authority without a necessity. From Abu Dharr al-Ghifari radiyallahu an. He asked the Prophet to appoint him to a public office. He said, Ya Rasulullah, ala tasta'miluni? O Messenger of Allah, will you not employ me? The Prophet struck the shoulders of Abu Dharr with his hand and he said, Ya Abu Dharr, innaka da'if, wa innaha amana, wa innaha yawm al-qiyamati khizyun wa nadama, illa man akhadhaha bihaqqiha, wa adda alladhi alayhi fiha. O Abu Dharr, you are weak, and this position is a trust, and on Yawm al-Qiyamah it will be a source of humiliation and regret, except for the one who takes it with due right and faithfully discharges his duty therein. In another narration, the Prophet ordered Abu Dharr, do not rule even over 2 people, and do not take charge of the wealth of the orphan, because he says that Abu Dharr is weak. Every job requires 2 characteristics, trust and ability to perform it. Amana wa quwwa. Inna khayra man istajarta al-qawiyyu al-amin. The best of the one whom you can employ is the strong and the trustworthy. So one without the other is no good. Abu Dharr al-Ghifari radiyallahu an, an eminent companion, was without a doubt trustworthy. He was Amin. However, he did not have the ability to carry out this job in public office. And the Prophet just told him outright, you are weak. This is not meant to be an insult. The Prophet ﷺ would never do that. But it is meant to protect Abu Dharr from getting himself into a real mess in public office. The most trustworthy of all was the Prophet ﷺ, and the companions learned from him. And from their time with him, the Prophet's amana rubbed off on the companions. Allah Jalla wa Ala says in Surah Al-Ahzab, وَإِذْ تَقُولُ لِلَّذِي أَنْعَمَ اللَّهُ عَلَيْهِ وَأَنْعَمْتَ عَلَيْهِ أَمْسِكْ عَلَيْكَ زَوْجَكَ وَاتَّقِ اللَّهَ وَتُخْفِي فِي نَفْسِكَ مَا اللَّهُ مُبْدِيهِ وَتَخْشَى النَّاسَ وَاللَّهُ أَحَقُّ أَنْ تَخْشَى. The ayah, number 37 in Ahzab, says that the Prophet feared the people and Allah was more worthy to be feared. Aisha says that if the Prophet were to hide any particular ayah from the Quran, it would have been this one, because this ayah brings out the innermost thoughts and secrets of the Prophet, that he was fearing the people, and Allah has more right to be feared. Who wants his innermost thoughts and secrets to be brought to the public? No one. This would be embarrassing. So if the Prophet had to hide an ayah, it would have been this one. Yet we find over 1400 years later we are reciting this ayah. The Prophet hid nothing, and that is from his amana, his trust. The Prophet says that this position of authority on Yawm al-Qiyamah will be a khizyun, which is a humiliation, and a nadama, regret. These people who did not discharge their trust faithfully in the public office will be humiliated, and they will regret taking the public office, except for the one who takes it with due right and faithfully discharges his obligation therein, because for these there will be a goodly reward. But most people are not like this. Most people want to line their pockets with some good money. And in case one says that this hadith detracts from the status of Abu Dharr, we find in another narration the Prophet said, and this is in the same chapter, Inni uhibbu laka ma uhibbu li nafsi. I love for you what I love for myself. And then he told him not to be a ruler over even 2 people and not to take charge of the orphan's wealth, because he is unable to fulfill this type of responsibility. So actually this is a praise for Abu Dharr, because the Prophet says that he loves him. Similarly how he told Mu'adh, Ya Mu'adh, inni uhibbuk, O Mu'adh, verily I love you. فَلَا تَدَعَنَّ أَن تَقُولَ دُبُرَ كُلِّ صَلَاةٍ مَكْتُوبَةٍ اللهم أعني على ذكرك وشكرك وحسن عبادتك. So do not fail to say at the back of every fard salah this dua. The next chapter about the merits of a just ruler and the punishment of a tyrant and the prohibition of making life difficult for the people. From Abdullah ibn Umar that the Prophet said, إن المقسطين عند الله على منابر من نور عن يمين الرحمن عز وجل وكلتا يديه يمين الذين يعدلون في حكمهم وأهليهم وما ولوا. Those who do justice will be with Allah on pulpits of light on the right side of the Rahman, and both his hands are yameen. Those are the people who did justice in their ruling and in their family and in those affairs in which they were in charge of. He says both his hands are yameen. Now yameen could mean right, so right as opposed to left. But yameen can also come from yuman, which means blessed. When someone is maymoon, it means they are fortunate or blessed. Because we have another narration which talks about the shimal or the left hand of Allah. So upon that then we cannot say that both his hands are right. In this hadith there is a clear-cut virtue and benefit and reward for those who did justice in this world, for those who carried out justice in this world, in their families and in those affairs which they were in charge of. And what is justice? Well, justice is defined by the Sharia. It is not defined by man. It's like when Allah Jalla wa Ala tells you to work righteousness. Who defines what righteousness is? Well, righteousness is defined by the Sharia itself. Also from Abdurrahman ibn Shamasa, he came to Aisha to inquire something, and she asked him, "Where are you from?" He said, "Egypt." She said, "What's the behavior of your governor in this war of yours?" He said, "We do not experience anything bad from him. If the camel of one of us dies, he would provide him with a new one. If anyone lost a servant, he would give him another servant. If anyone is in need of the basic necessities of life, he would provide him." She said, "Behold, the treatment meted out to my brother Muhammad ibn Abi Bakr does not prevent me from telling you what I heard from the Messenger of Allah ﷺ. He said, in this house of mine, Allahumma man waliya min amri ummati shay'an fashaqqa alayhim fashquq alayh, wa man waliya min amri ummati shay'an farafaqa bihim farfuq bih." O Allah, whoever is in charge of my ummah and creates hardship for them, then you create hardship for him. And whoever takes charge of my ummah and is kind to them, then you be kind to him. Aisha mentions that some injustice was meted out to her brother Muhammad ibn Abi Bakr. What's that all about? Well, he was killed by Muawiyah ibn Khalij unjustly. We find this incredible self-control and justice from Aisha, that her brother was killed unjustly in that place, yet still, about the people who unjustly killed her, she mentions a hadith which describes the good qualities of the people whom she has personal enmity with. And that is the dua of the Prophet: whoever takes charge of my ummah and is hard on them, then create hardship for him, but whoever is easy on them, then create ease for him. However, it needs to be noted, if a ruler or somebody in charge punishes the ones under him with due right, then it cannot be said that he is creating hardship for them. The hardship spoken of in this hadith is without due right. And note the generality of the hadith: Man waliya min amri ummati shay'an. Whoever is in charge of anything from my ummah. So this would even include a teacher or a headmaster in a school. It does not have to be political power. Also in the chapter, from Ibn Umar, the Prophet said, ألا كلكم راع وكلكم مسؤول عن رعيته. Every one of you is a shepherd, and everyone will be questioned about his flock. فالأمير الذي على الناس راع وهو مسؤول عن رعيته. So the ruler is a shepherd over his flock, and he will be questioned about his flock. والرجل راع على أهل بيته وهو مسؤول عنهم. And the man is a shepherd or a ruler over the family members of his house, and he will be questioned about them. وَالْمَرْأَةُ رَاعِيَةٌ عَلَى بَيْتِ بَعْلِهَا وَوَلَدِهِ وَهِيَ مَسْئُولَةٌ عَنْهُمْ. And the wife is in charge of the house of her husband and his children, and she will be asked about them. وَالْعَبْدُ رَاعٍ عَلَى مَالِ سَيِّدِهِ وَهُوَ مَسْئُولٌ عَنْهُ. And the servant is in charge of the wealth of his master, and he will be asked about it. أَلَا فَكُلُّكُمْ رَاعٍ وَكُلُّكُمْ مَسْئُولٌ عَنْ رَعِيَّتِهِ. Behold, every one of you is a shepherd and will be asked about his flock. So the flock spoken of in this hadith is simply those people or things you are in charge of. So you have a trust, an amana. In the hadith he talks about the ruler, the man, the wife, and the servant. Whatever status you have in society, you are in charge of something, and you will be questioned about that. Also in this hadith, there is a strong indication that the wife is the homemaker, and the husband is the breadwinner, because the husband is in charge of the family members of his house, that is, to feed them, clothe them, and look after the economic needs. The wife, he says, is in charge of the house of her husband, not the people of the house, but the house of the husband and his children. So that is, she's the homemaker, looks after the house affairs, looks after the children, and she's not a career woman, as the kuffar are infatuated with these days. Also in the chapter, from Ma'qal ibn Yasar, that the Prophet said, مَا مِنْ عَبْدٍ يَسْتَرْعِيهِ اللَّهُ رَعِيَّةً يَمُوتُ يَوْمَ يَمُوتُ وَهُوَ غَاشٌ لِرَعِيَّتِهِ إِلَّا حَرَّمَ اللَّهُ عَلَيْهِ الْجَنَّةِ. There is no servant whom Allah puts in charge of other people, and he dies, and the day he dies, he is cheating or deceiving his people, except that Allah will make Jannah haram for him. And again, we say with this hadith what we said with the last, this ra'iyya, this flock, it does not mean that you're in charge of the whole nation. Yes, it includes that, but also other things as well, like a headmaster or any position of authority. The hadith mentions that Allah will make Jannah haram for him. Does that not support the madhab of the Khawarij, who say that the one who commits a major sin will not be in Jannah and is a kafir? This deprivation of Jannah is of two types, hirmanul mutlaq and mutlaqu hirman. So al-hirmanul mutlaq, the absolute deprivation, this is for the kafir. As for the mutlaqul hirman, this is to say that they will enter Jahannam first and then enter Jannah. So they will be deprived from entering Jannah the first time around, but eventually they will enter Jannah. This is mutlaqul hirman. And the al-hirmanul mutlaq is that they will be deprived from entering Jannah forever. And like this, we reconcile all the evidences, as opposed to the Ahlul Bid'ah, who just cling hold of the evidence which suits them. Another hadith of the chapter says, any ruler who does not strive for his people and is not sincere to them will not enter Jannah with them. So that narration is stricter, because the previous one talks about cheating, and this one speaks about simply not being sincere with them. It tells us how heavy this responsibility really is. And anyone who truly realizes how heavy this responsibility is would not want to seek it.
We may also take from the fact that the servant is in charge of the master's wealth, that if the servant were to steal from the master's wealth, his hand would not be cut off, because there is a shubha. The servant has a right to the master's wealth, because the master has to pay for the servant's upkeep. Similarly, if a wife were to steal from the husband's wealth, her hand would not be cut off, because there is a shubha. She has a share in this wealth, or at least she has a right to this wealth to some extent.
Let's move to the next chapter about ghulul being a serious offense. From Abu Hurairah, the Prophet said, لا ألفين أحدكم يجيء يوم القيامة على رقبته بعير له رغاء يقول يا رسول الله أغثني فأقول لا أملك لك شيئا قد أبلغتك. I must not find any of you coming to me on Yawm al-Qiyamah with a growling camel mounted on his neck, and he's saying to me, O Messenger of Allah, Aghithni, that is, save me from my distress. I will say to him, I have no authority to help you. I have already conveyed the message to you. لا ألفين أحدكم يجيء يوم القيامة على رقبته فرس له حمحمة فيقول يا رسول الله أغثني فأقول لا أملك لك شيئا قد أبلغتك. I must not find any of you coming to me on Yawm al-Qiyamah with a neighing horse strung onto his neck, and he is asking me, O Messenger of Allah, save me from my distress, and I will tell him, I do not have authority to help you, rather I have already conveyed the message to you. لا ألفين أحدكم يجيء يوم القيامة على رقبته شاة له ثغاء يقول يا رسول الله أغثني فأقول لا أملك لك شيئا قد أبلغتك. I must not find one of you coming to me on Yawm al-Qiyamah with a bleating sheep on his neck, and he is saying to me, O Messenger of Allah, help me. And I will say to him, I have no authority to aid you, I have already conveyed the message. لا ألفين أحدكم يجيء يوم القيامة على رقبته نفس لها صياح فيقول يا رسول الله أغثني فأقول لا أملك لك شيئا قد أبلغتك. I must not find any of you coming to me with a crying person strung onto his neck, and he is asking me, O Messenger of Allah, help me from my distress, and I will say to him, I have no authority to help you, I have already conveyed the message. لا ألفين أحدكم يجيء يوم القيامة على رقبته رقاع تخفق فيقول يا رسول الله أغثني فأقول لا أملك لك شيئا قد أبلغتك. Let me not find any of you coming to me on Yawm al-Qiyamah with fluttering clothes or rags wrapped around his neck, and he's asking me, O Messenger of Allah, help me from my distress, and I say to him, I have no authority to do that, I have already conveyed the message to you. لا ألفين أحدكم يجيء يوم القيامة على رقبته صامت فيقول يا رسول الله أغثني فأقول لا أملك لك شيئا قد أبلغتك. I must not find any of you coming to me on Yawm al-Qiyamah with heaps of gold and silver tied around his neck, and he's asking me to aid him in his distress, and I will say to him, I have no authority to do that, I have already conveyed the message to you. In this hadith, we find quite a few items mentioned, which will be tied around the neck of a particular person. These items mentioned: a camel, a horse, a sheep, another person, some fluttering rags, and heaps of gold and silver. So these are 6 items mentioned. And these are items which a person has stolen from the war booty. And if that were to happen, then the Prophet ﷺ is telling us in this hadith, he will not be able to help us. But what about this idea of another person strung onto his neck shouting? Can you steal another person? Well, the answer is yes, you can steal a servant from the war booty. And so this is a harrowing hadith and a warning, which means that ghulul is a major sin, because a specific punishment and a specific warning has been given for this particular sin. And that is the definition of a major sin. The next chapter about accepting gifts on the part of a state officer is forbidden. From Abu Humayd, he says that a man from the Al-Azd tribe, who was called Ibn al-Lutbiyya, was in charge of collecting charity. And he was given a gift from one of the people giving him the sadaqah. And he came to the Prophet saying, this is what is given to me as a gift, and this is for you. And to this the Prophet stood up giving a public address. And he says, what about a state official who has been presented a gift? Why does he not remain in the house of his father or the house of his mother? And then let him observe, will he be given a gift or not? By the one who has my life in his hand, no one will take anything from it, but will bring it on the day of judgment carrying on his neck a camel that will be growling, or a cow that will be bellowing, or an ewe, that's a female sheep, that will be bleating. Then the Prophet raised his hands so that we could see the whiteness of his armpit, and he said twice, O Allah, have I not conveyed the message? So we find from this narration, it is similar to the one we have just narrated from the previous chapter. What appears to be the case is that taking or accepting a gift given to you, if you are in charge of collecting the sadaqah, is from ghulul. So the ghulul is not just stealing from the war booty, that is how it's most often done, but coming under the umbrella of ghulul also is taking a gift. If you are a state official collecting sadaqah, you are not allowed to do that. In another narration, Ibn al-Lutbiyya from the tribe of Al-Azd was in charge of collecting the sadaqah. He was given a gift, he came to the Prophet and he said, هذه هدية أهديت لي. This is a gift which has been given to me. And the Prophet said, أفلا قعدت في بيت أبيك وأمك فتنظر أيهدى إليك أم لا. And then the Prophet stood up giving a public address about this matter. So the Prophet said to him, why did you not sit in the house of your father or your mother and then take a look? Is a gift going to be given to you or not? Gifts being given to a sadaqah collector is a type of bribery, because if you accept gifts from someone, you are naturally going to have a soft spot for him. This is natural in human nature. And so what does that mean? It means that there could come a time where he tries to take advantage of that soft spot you have for him by not giving you what he is supposed to give you from the sadaqah. Therefore, we say the same thing about a qadi as well, a judge. He should not be accepting gifts from anyone, because if he has a soft spot for somebody, he may judge in his favor unjustly. Some scholars have even said that a qadi, a judge, should not go out to do shopping by himself, because some people selling him items may give him a cheap, nice, easy price so as to get on his good side, so that if this vendor gets into trouble and has to go to court, then hopefully this qadi will give him an easy judgment because he's got on the qadi's good side or good books, and the qadi has a soft spot for him because of the vendor's favorable treatment of the qadi. Whilst we do not agree with this particular opinion, and we feel that the qadi can go and shop by himself, but we are just mentioning this to inform you how strict some scholars can be. The idea is to prevent people from softening you up. What about students giving gifts to teachers? Well, if this is after the exams, with the results published and so on, then this is fine, because there's not much chance now that the teacher will have a soft spot for that particular student. Otherwise, if there is a fear that the teacher may develop a soft spot for the student and give him favorably in the exam results, then no, this is not permissible. Also, we find it is sunnah to give a public address so that the message can reach as far wide as possible and people can benefit from certain issues that arise in the community, such as what we find in this example with the workers accepting gifts. But this should be done without character assassinating anyone and publicly defaming anyone. The Prophet did not mention the name of Ibn al-Lutbiyya in the public address. It's the same thing with the situation of Barira. The Prophet, when he rebuked the conditions that the family of Barira made on Aisha, that the wala should be for them, the Prophet, when he rebuked this, he did not mention the particular people who committed that error. Rather, he just gave a general rule. So the idea is not to publicly defame someone. Rather, the idea is to enjoin the good and forbid the evil. So you talk about ideas, not the people. Let's take the next chapter. Obedience to the ruler is obligatory except in sinful matters. From Abu Hurairah, the Prophet said, "Man ata'ani faqad ata'a Allah, wa man asani faqad asa Allah, wa man ata'a amiri faqad ata'ani, wa man asa amiri faqad asani." Whoever obeys me, obeys Allah. Whoever disobeys me, disobeys Allah. Whoever obeys my ruler, obeys me, and whoever disobeys my ruler, disobeys me. As for obeying the ruler, that is the Khalifa or the Muslim ruler, then he is the Prophet's wakil. And so obeying him would be like obeying the Prophet, and disobeying him would be like disobeying the Prophet, except in those cases in which he orders you to do that which is haram. In the Musnad of Imam Ahmad, the Prophet ﷺ said, "La ta'ata li makhluqin fi ma'siyatil khaliq." There is no obedience to the creation in that which is disobedience to the Creator. If the ruler orders you to do something which Allah Jalla wa Ala has not ordered, but neither forbidden, then it is obligatory to obey the command. For example, the rule where you have to stop at a red traffic light. Allah has not ordered us to stop at a red traffic light, but neither has Allah forbidden us from stopping at the red traffic light. However, the ruler implements this law, and so it is obligatory upon us to obey him. And the evidence for that is this hadith, as well as other evidence such as يا أيها الذين آمنوا أطيعوا الله وأطيعوا الرسول وأولي الأمر منكم. So the ulul amr is the ruler, the one who owns the matter. As for the ayah in Surah An-Nisa about obeying Allah and the Messenger and those in authority amongst you, this is ayah 59 in Surah An-Nisa, we are told in the chapter by Ibn Jurayj that this ayah was sent down regarding Abdullah ibn Hudhafa as-Sahmi, who was put in charge of an army detachment, and so the soldiers had to follow him and obey his commands, because he is from the ulul amr, from those people in authority. Does the ruler have to be righteous, or is it obligatory to obey even an evil ruler? The answer is the latter. Even if he's evil, you have to obey him. And you do not get more evil than Al-Hajjaj ibn Yusuf, who would kill people and murdered many companions. Yet the companions still obeyed him and did not revolt against him. Some people throwing shubuhat or specious arguments may say that Aisha radiallahu anha opposed Ali ibn Abi Talib when Ali was the Khalifa. So why can't we oppose the ruler in that case? What's good enough for Aisha is good enough for us. Or we say that Aisha made a ta'wil, she had a particular interpretation, a particular ijtihad which she made, and she was wrong in that. The Sahaba can be wrong. In fact, there were some other Sahaba who followed her in this ijtihad of hers. The ijtihad of a Sahabi can be wrong. We know in that particular matter, the Battle of the Camel, that Aisha was wrong and Ali radiallahu anh was in the right. So you follow the Sahaba in that which agrees with the Sunnah, not in that which disagrees with the Sunnah. Also in the chapter, from Abu Hurairah, the Prophet said, عَلَيْكَ بِالسَّمْعِ وَالطَّاعَةِ فِي عُسْرِكَ وَيُسْرِكَ وَمَنْشَطِكَ وَمَكْرَهِكَ وَأَثَرَةٍ عَلَيْكَ. Upon you is to hear and obey the ruler in times of adversity and prosperity, in pleasure and displeasure, and in times when the ruler takes your wealth and does not give it to you. Or it could also mean during times when the ruler gives undue, preferred treatment to somebody else over you. So that is to say, obey the ruler when it is easy for you to obey, because anyone can obey when it is easy to obey, but the real test is, are you going to obey the ruler when it is difficult for you to obey? When you are feeling indignant? That's when true obedience comes into its own. So, for example, let us suppose you have the right to take some wealth from the Baytul Mal, and the ruler gives you less than your basic minimum requirement, and he keeps the rest for his own self. This is athara, where he favors his own self over you. And so naturally you'll find a dislike and a distaste to the ruler, and you would not want to obey him. However, it's precisely in times like this where you are required to obey. Otherwise anyone can obey when they want to obey. Okay, what about going out on peaceful demonstrations against the government policy? Going out on demonstrations is not a good idea because it opens the door to many problems and it tempts people to enter violent acts. And it also shows yourself to be weak, and it is not particularly dignified. So by way of advice, we would say that this ought not to be done. But the problem is it's become so normalized nowadays that people do not see anything wrong with it. But that does not remove it from being an undignified action. Also in the chapter from Abu Dharr al-Ghifari, he says, إِنَّ خَلِيلِي أَوْصَانِي أَنْ أَسْمَعَ وَأُطِيعَ وَإِنْ كَانَ عَبْدًا حَبَشِيًّا مُجَدَّعَ الْأَطْرَافِ. My Khalil, Abu Dharr says, referring to the Prophet, gave me a firm order to listen and obey, meaning the ruler, even if the ruler is a maimed Abyssinian servant. Now the interesting point here is that Abu Dharr says that the Prophet is his Khalil, but we know that the Prophet did not take anyone as a Khalil, not even Abu Bakr. So the way to reconcile is to say that Abu Dharr has taken the Prophet as his Khalil, but the Prophet has not taken Abu Dharr as his Khalil. And also we find in the narration that even if a maimed Abyssinian servant was to become your ruler, you have to listen and obey. And this is because a maimed Abyssinian servant would be the last type of person you would want to obey, as you would feel he has the lowest status in society, so why would you want to obey him? And he's maimed as well, so maybe he has an arm missing or a leg missing, so that makes you even more averse to him. But this is where real obedience comes into its own, when you do not want to obey, and you have to obey for the sake of Allah Jalla wa Ala. That is true obedience. At this point one may ask about entering into parliaments and elections, because this is all to do with ruling. Entering into parliament, especially when most of the people in parliament do not believe in Allah Jalla wa Ala, and they do not believe that the ahkam of the deen should have a role in the policies of the country. And this is perfectly understandable in kuffar countries, but this type of mentality may even be creeping in to Muslim countries, where the ilmaniyun, those people who say that life needs to be without the deen, so that is, you live your life without deen, and that the policies must have nothing to do with the ahkam of the sharia. That is, of course, complete kufr. But nevertheless, these parliaments will be filled with people like these. Can somebody who has the ability to argue and the ability to change public opinion, who is a Muslim, of course, arguing from the standpoint of view of the sharia to change the hearts and minds of the people in a Muslim land, can he enter such a parliament with the intention of rectifying the affairs? Well, we say this would be a good idea. He's not going there to take part in the evils. Rather, he's going there with the intention of rectifying the affair and you are allowed to go into a gathering of evil people with the intention of rectifying the affair if you are able to do so. Otherwise, it is impermissible for you to even be in their company, because then you will be just like them. And it's the same thing for voting as well. You are allowed to vote as long as it is voting for the lesser of the evil people, even if the rule is a non-Islamic rule, because it is your intention which matters. Your intention is not that the kufr rule is superior to the sharia rule. No, because that will make you into a kafir whether you vote or not. Rather, your intention is to minimize the shar or the corruption in the land, and that is a noble intention. We find that the companions would want the Rum to have victory over the Faris, because the Rum were Christians and the Faris were mushrikeen. And at least the Christians are closer to Islam than the Faris, even if they are both kuffar. So it's all about wanting the lesser of the evil. Also in the chapter from Ali radiallahu anh, the Prophet sent a military detachment and he appointed a man to lead them. This man kindled a fire and he said to his followers, enter it. Some people wanted to enter it to obey the ruler, and others said, we have only entered Islam fleeing from the fire. So that is to say, why would we want to enter the fire when we embraced Islam fleeing from the fire? This makes no sense. And this incident was mentioned to the Prophet, and the Prophet said to those who wanted to enter the fire, لَوْ دَخَلْتُمُوهَا لَمْ تَزَالُوا فِيهَا إِلَى يَوْمِ الْقِيَامَةِ. If you had entered it, you would have stayed in it up till Yawm al-Qiyamah. And he said something good to the other group of people. And thereafter the Prophet said, لا طاعة في معصية الله إنما الطاعة في المعروف. There is no obedience in the disobedience of Allah, rather obedience is only in that which is good and proper. One may ask the question, why did this leader of the army kindle the fire and tell the people to enter into it? Well, the reason is, as is mentioned in one of the narrations, is that the people did something to anger him, and as a reaction from this anger, he kindled the fire and told them to enter it. In the end, nobody entered it, even though some people from them did have the intention of entering it. We learn from the hadith that the ta'ah, the obedience, is only in that which is ma'ruf. Ma'ruf literally meaning known, that is, known to be good and right and proper. But take note here, it is not for people to decide what is ma'ruf. That which is ma'ruf is decided and determined by the sharia itself. Because for many people, homosexuality can be ma'ruf, drinking wine can be ma'ruf, listening to music can be ma'ruf, having premarital relationships can be ma'ruf. All of these things can be ma'ruf in the minds of the people. أَفَمَنْ زُيَّنَ لَهُ سُوءُ عَمَلِهِ فَرَآهُ حَسَنًا. The one whose evil has been made fair seeming to him, and he sees it as something good. So that which is ma'ruf cannot be left down to the whims and caprice of the people. Also in the chapter from Ubadah ibn Samit, who narrated that we gave the pleasure of allegiance to the Messenger, among the injunctions which he made binding upon us was to listen and obey to the Amir in times of pleasure and displeasure, difficulty and ease, and in times when we are not given our due rights, and that we should not dispute with the ruler, إِلَّا أَن تَرَوْا كُفْرًا بَوَاحًا عِنْدَكُم مِّنَ اللَّهِ فِيهِ بُرْهَانٌ. Except if you see open or plain kufr from which you have evidence from Allah. In another version, Ubadah also mentions that we took a pledge to speak the truth, whatever position we may be in, and not fear regarding Allah Jalla wa Ala anyone who would blame us. And also supporting this in another authentic hadith, the Prophet ﷺ said, لا يمنعن أحدا هيبة الناس أن يقول بالحق إذا علم. Let not the fear of people prevent any one of you from speaking the truth when he knows what the truth is. However, you may be in a situation where if you do speak the truth, you might be executed. What about a situation like this? Do you speak the truth or not? We say that if in hiding the truth here, it will actually bury the truth for the future generations, then in a case like this you have to speak the truth even if it means your demise. But if that will not be the case, so that if you hid the truth, but the truth will not be buried forever, and you can save your life thereby, then yes, you're allowed to save your life. Because in a necessity situation, you're allowed to commit acts of kufr to save your life, we know that, and this would be similar to that. But in a case where the truth will be buried for future generations, then this is not a matter of saving your life. Now this becomes a matter of jihad for the sake of Allah Jalla wa Ala, where if it comes down to it, you have to lay down your life. And the illustration here is during the time of Imam Ahmad, when he was forced to say that the Quran is created, because the ruler at that time was influenced by the people of Bid'ah. Some scholars equivocated. They counted on their fingers, saying the Torah, the Injil, the Suhuf Musa, and the Quran, all of these are created, pointing to their fingers, intending thereby their fingers are created. So this is equivocation. However, Imam Ahmad, he said, no, if I equivocate, the truth will become dead and buried. So he explicitly stated that the Quran is not created, it is a speech of Allah, and he was punished for this. Another illustration, the story of the boy and the king, which is also mentioned in Sahih Muslim. The king was calling to shirk, the boy calling to tawheed. The king tried to kill him by trying to drown him in the sea, but Allah saved him, and then he tried to push him off a mountain. Again, Allah Jalla wa Ala saved him, and the boy said, the way you're going to kill me is to take the arrow and to say, Bismillahi Rabbil Ghulam, in the name of Allah, the Rabb of the boy, and fire it. And the king did so, and the boy died. So the king, thinking that yes, he has got rid of the boy, he did not know the effect this would have, in that everyone else converted to Islam. And the situation went out of control for the king, so he had to dig a ditch and kindle it with fire and throw everyone in it. And then from that we have the episode of the child in the cradle speaking to his mother, telling her to jump into the fire because you are upon the truth. Now why didn't the boy just simply feign kufr, so pretend to be a kafir, in order to save his life? Because if he does so, then who will preach the message to the people? How will the people embrace Islam? So he was ready to lay down his life so that the truth remains alive even if he dies. Because then the people saw that the king tried to kill this boy to no avail. Yet when the king mentions the name of the Rabb of this boy, it works. So what does that mean? It means that the matter and the decree belongs to the Rabb of this boy, which means that what this boy is calling to is the truth. And so that's how the truth was preserved. Okay, what about this point about rebelling against the ruler? إِلَّا أَن تَرَوْا كُفْرًا بَوَاحًا عِنْدَكُم مِّنَ اللَّهِ فِيهِ بُرْهَانٌ. There are conditions. That you see plain kufr. That is, you must have complete knowledge. So firstly you ask, is this action actually kufr or just a sin? So this requires knowledge from the text. Secondly, not everyone who commits an act of kufr is a kafir. You have to ask yourself, okay, now that this action itself is kufr, can we make takfir on the one doing it? It may be that the ruler does not know it is kufr, or perhaps he has a different interpretation. We can take the example of riba. Some scholars may say that rules and regulations can be made by man, because the Prophet said, Antum a'lamu bi umuri dunyakum. You are better knowing about the matters of your daily living. And so rules and regulations can be made by man and not taken from the Quran and the Sunnah. So whatever is in the interest of the people, then that is okay. So riba, for example, if you take a loan of £10,000 from the bank to give them back £15,000 after some years agreed upon, then this riba istithmari is okay because it benefits the bank and it benefits the person who wants to, let's say, start up a business. They say the type of riba which is haram is the one where the rich people exploit the poor. And they say that Allah says, وَإِن تُبْتُمْ فَلَكُمْ رُؤُوسُ أَمْوَالِكُمْ لَا تَظْلِمُونَ وَلَا تُظْلَمُونَ. If you repent, then you will have your capital sums. You will not oppress, nor will you be oppressed. And they say that this riba istithmari, which you take out from the bank, is not oppression because it is done by your own choice. Now if these types of scholars give this argument to the ruler, and the rulers mainly are ignorant anyway, then they may think that such a riba from banks is halal. So can we say that such a ruler now is a kafir? The answer is no. Yes, riba in and of itself is haram. And yes, the ruler is deeming this to be halal. But we cannot say he's a kafir because he has a ta'wil. So in summary, note then, two conditions. First of all, we must have evidence that the actual action is kufr. And secondly, we need to know that takfir does apply to this particular person committing this act. Note the word used in the hadith, burhan. It is a clear-cut evidence. So there are 5 conditions in total. Number 1, al-ilm. We must have particular sure knowledge that he has committed a particular action. Secondly, we must have knowledge from the Quran and Sunnah that this action is kufr. Thirdly, this kufr action must be bawah, must be clear and in the open, not some sort of kufr which he commits secretly. And fourthly, you have clear-cut evidence that takfir can be made on such a person. And there is a 5th condition, not explicitly mentioned in this hadith, but we know it from other evidences, that you have the ability to oust this ruler. If you do not have the military ability, then it is best to keep patient. Otherwise, you're creating more fitna than you are already experiencing. Just a word on the kufr bawah, the kufr being wadih or clear-cut. If the ruler is drunk with wine and he's addicted to wine, is this clear-cut kufr that he is making wine halal? The answer is no, because he may deem it to be haram, yet he's still addicted to it. Whereas if he openly and explicitly states that wine is halal, then this action is open kufr. However, there still remains the matter of whether takfir can be made on him. Because remember, maybe he does not know, or maybe he's under the influence of some shubuhat or specious arguments. One may ask, what if a Muslim nation is under occupation by the kuffar, let's say by the Jihaad or by Nasara or anyone else? Can we not fight back, even if we do not have the ability to do so? Because one may ask, if we do not fight back, then the Muslims will become eradicated and hence the truth will die with them. Well, the answer is no, you do not fight back if you do not have the ability to do so. And the situation here is not like the situation of Imam Ahmad, where he was willing to be tormented and even executed, because his battle was an ideological battle. Whereas when we talk about occupation of a Muslim land, this battle is not ideological, rather it is military and much more physical.
So you understand that a military struggle is less serious than an ideological one. For all the Muslims to be wiped out completely off the face of the map upon Islam is better than for them to be living a long life upon misguidance. Before we end, just notice that in the incident where the leader asked the people to enter the fire, one group wanted to obey the leader and the other group did not want to. And the Prophet praised the ones who got their ijtihad right. This is similar to the incident of Banu Qurayza and the Prophet ordering the people to pray Asr only at Qurayza, and the Muslimin were divided into 2 camps. So it shows that the Sahaba can also differ amongst themselves and have differing ijtihad. If that's the case with them, then it would be even more so the case with us. So there should be no rebuking people in matters of genuine ijtihad. Okay, what is the ruling on giving the Pledge of Allegiance to the Imam? Well, it is wajib if the Muslimin have an Imam to pledge allegiance to. But if they do not, and the matter is anarchy, then you do not stick to any groups, you keep to yourself. And the evidence for this is found in Sahih Muslim. Coming up, it is the hadith of Hudhayfa ibn al-Yaman, where the Prophet told him, keep away from all the groups, even if you have to bite onto the root of a tree until death takes you and you are in this state. What is the ruling on taking up arms against the ruler to oust him? Because we read in the hadith, وَأَلَّا نُنَازِعَ الْأَمْرَ أَهْلَهُ إِلَّا أَن تَرَوْا كُفْرًا بَوَاحًا عِنْدَكُم مِّنَ اللَّهِ فِيهِ بُرْهَانٌ. Well, we gave the conditions of taking up arms against the ruler. Okay, that's straightforward enough, but what about if a ruler is a Muslim but is an evildoer and establishes evil in the land, such as riba or gambling or nightclubs and brothels and other such evil actions which corrupt the heart and mind of the people? Well, again, as long as he's a Muslim, you're not allowed to rebel against him, meaning a military rebellion, or what they call an insurrection. However, if it is possible to remove an evil ruler who is still a Muslim without military uprising, then this is permissible. For example, you might advise a ruler that it is in the best interest of the country to step down, because it may be that the presence of the ruler is causing unrest in the land and there is a danger of civil disputes and a civil war. So there is nothing wrong with advising a ruler privately to step down. Because the text mention a military uprising against the ruler, how that is not permissible. The texts do not appear to speak about removing a ruler without military interference, such as diplomatic means. And it comes under the heading of Islah, or rectifying the affairs in the land. Okay, let's take some review questions. So question number 1. Is it permissible for a Muslim to seek leadership in a Muslim country? Give evidence for your answer and discuss the issue of Yusuf alayhi salam seeking leadership. Question number 2. We said it is permissible to militarily rebel against a ruler in an Islamic state. Give the 5 conditions which we mentioned for this to be justified. Question number 3. Why should people in positions of authority, such as judges or zakah collectors, not accept gifts given to them personally?